It's time for episode 111 of The Crisis Show here on Google Hangouts, on YouTube, and wherever else you have this link around the world. Good evening from New York. My name is Rich Klein. I'm president of Rich Klein Crisis Management and founder and host of The Crisis Show. Tonight, we're going to talk about the University of Missouri. The big crisis out there with the, I don't know whose phone that is, but anyway, I'm going to continue here.
I've set fire to it. It won't bother you anymore.
Okay. Anyway, so as I was saying, folks, sorry for the interruption, sorry for the late start. So we had some technical difficulties, and our colleague has caused another. We'll get to him later. In any case, Rich Klein from New York, founder and host of The Crisis Show. We talk about the University of Missouri, the big crisis out there that's catching fire among higher education officials and other leaders. And what we want to talk about tonight is the broader issue of what to do when you face a situation like this. How do you prepare for a situation when you have student protests or any other situation where you have leaders that are forced to resign? What does that do to an institution? So joining us tonight to talk about that and more, because as we all know, there's a lot of complexities to the stories and a lot of different sides to the story. First of all, I want to introduce my dear cousin who is a student at the University of Missouri. She's going to be with us for about 10 minutes before she has to go to work because they got to pay those college bills. My dear cousin, Emily Sachs. How are you, Emily?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. And Emily's the first time on the show, so we're thrilled to have her. And our other two guests, regular guests on the show, I'm thrilled to have them. First of all, from the West Third Group coming out of Las Vegas, but also I believe he lived in Missouri at one time, Greg Brooks. How are you, Greg?
Glad to be here, and that's right, 10 years in the Show Me State.
Wonderful. And our resident Missourian, if there's such a word, I made that up because I'm from up north, my good friend Tripp, Frochlichstein, a former newsman and head of MediaMasters. How are you?
And 65 years in Missouri. I'm great, thank you. Thanks for letting us talk about this. I think there's a lot of important stuff to say.
Absolutely. So, Emily, you're kind of like an on-the-ground reporter, if you will, and for folks, forgive us, Emily had trouble connecting by audio, but we're doing this by FaceTime audio. Hopefully you'll hear her. Emily, tell us what you're hearing and seeing from other students, and how long has this been brewing also?
For me, as a student here, I never noticed it being a pressing issue until about the past 2 weeks. It kind of started being a little bit of an issue about a month ago during our homecoming when some racial slurs were yelled during a black homecoming event, and then it kind of escalated from there.
Now let me interrupt you there, Emily, because this is a very interesting part of the conversation with the media going on, because it hasn't been entirely clear about these incidents. We've heard a lot of different stories. Are you hearing that from news reports, or are you hearing that from other students that these things actually happened? And
we got emails from our chancellor about all the events and from other students and everything. So it's a pretty direct source that it's all been coming from.
Okay.
To us as students.
And was this, now you're a senior there, has this been brewing in your entire 4 years there?
No, as I said, I've never noticed anything, or it has never been a pressing issue on campus until this past year. So. Okay.
And what else can you tell us about the climate right now? Here we are, and how do you feel as a student losing your chancellor and your president in the same day, just late yesterday?
Yeah, it's been kind of a big shock. I know a lot of people were especially surprised to hear about Chancellor Lofton's resignation after, Tim Wolf stepped down earlier in the day. I think a lot of people did not expect for Chancellor Lofton to also step down, let alone in the same day. So it's been kind of a big change and a big shock to a lot of students here.
Yeah, and what is is there like a student council? You guys meet, having any meetings in groups, or is it just sort of like by the water cooler, people just chatting about it?
It's pretty much just people chatting about it and posting and writing articles about it in all the local papers and everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you've been to the football games. Did you know any of the players on the team? Do you know any of the people involved in this? I'm sorry?
I've had class with a few football players. They're pretty nice. And but I think it was definitely a good thing that the football team got involved, because in my opinion, I think that's what made it go and get national recognition than just students camping out in peaceful protests. I think by having the football team and the coach kind of come in and add support to that and really stratify it into a larger level.
Yeah, and go ahead, Tripp. I'm sorry.
I'd like to answer a question, if I may.
Sure, please.
Yeah.
On the campus, one of the questions I have is there a lot of mixed feelings on this? I mean, I know many are supportive, but it sounds to me like many people did not support this. And, for example, on the St. Louis station's page, they opened it up for comments on their Facebook page. There are at least 250 comments, of which almost all were mad at the students and supported the administration. So I'm curious, are the students split?
I do know actually a lot of students who have been, that I've seen like posting on social media and everything, saying how they thought it was unnecessary to bring it into this high of a level of, like going on hunger strikes. They think that it is a issue on campus, but they didn't think that the measures that were taken, like so extreme, were necessary. I think that's how a lot of students feel on campus.
Yeah, Emily, let me ask you another question. You mentioned this was brewing this year. From your perspective, what were some of the grievances that you as a student and maybe other people that are close to you have with this president, this chancellor? I mean, what were your issues aside from what were perceived racial incidents, real or imagined?
Yeah, well, see, I'm a member. I'm in a sorority here at the zoo, and so as a member of the Greek community, a lot of members in that community were upset with the actions that our chancellor had taken over the summer when he imposed new fraternity rules about alcohol and hours that females could be on fraternity property and all this stuff. And it basically seemed like to a lot of Greek students that he's slowly trying to eliminate the Greek system from our campus. So I know that me as well as a bunch of other students have felt that he kind of overlooked the Greek life and kind of blamed it for a lot of sexual assaults and everything that had been happening on campus in the past 2 years. And so I know that that's been a lot of controversy.
Yeah, he may have been responding to incidents at other campuses, by the way. Because I think we even did a piece on this show about the Oklahoma situation, which you probably read about. So sometimes this is what happens, I guess. They read about something, and this will happen because of what happened at Missouri. Other schools may, take different actions regarding different situations. I imagine. So yeah. Okay. Well, I will. If you want to stay for the rest as long as you can. I know you have to go to work, but feel free to drop at any time. And thank you Thank you.
Can I ask her one more? Can I ask her one more question?
Please.
Yeah. I'm curious. On Sunday, Emily, did you think this would happen this quickly on Monday? That both. I mean, I know the one resignation was a surprise. You think he was going to try to tough it out and then eventually resign?
I definitely did think that Tim Wolf was going to last a lot longer than a week since the whole thing started, and I definitely did not see Chancellor Lofton resigning anywhere near as quickly as he did.
Was he better liked than the president? Was there a likability factor with either of them?
I think because he's the chancellor of University of Missouri itself, whereas Tim Wolf is the president of all University of Missouri's fiefdoms. So Chancellor Lofton was more of a direct, he's a more recognizable person on campus, but because of that and all of his actions have directly affected Mizzou's campus, I think that he was less liked than Tim Wolf to begin with, just because he was the chancellor of our school specifically. Gotcha.
Well, thank you so much again. Love to the family. Just as an aside, Emily's great-grandfather and my grandfather are brothers. That's our connection. And Emily's from Minneapolis and in the Minneapolis area. And we visited with her a few times, and we're all very close. And it's so good to see you. What's your major?
Marketing.
Oh, good. Well, you did great on your first appearance. We are going to have you back as time goes on, and if you're open to it, this is one of those stories that has legs, as we say in the business. So we'd love to have you back because things change on the ground, certainly. So thank you. For sure. Yeah, thank you.
It was good to. Yeah, thanks for having me on. And
pleasure. Love to the family. We'll talk to you soon, and you can bow at any time you want.
All right, I'm gonna go now.
Thank you.
You guys later.
Have a good night. Take care. Bye bye. Okay. I hit this end button call. All right, so that was interesting. So Thanks for those questions too, Tripp. So yeah, I mean, we can take this conversation any way you want to go, of course. But I think it was interesting to have a little piece of it on the ground, as much as we can get it beyond some of the media coverage. You know, guys, what troubled me with this.
Before you go on, Rich, I know I'm messing you up again. I asked her about the divisiveness, and this may set up what you're about to say too. So I just wanted to say one more thing that. I mentioned the Facebook thing, but I talked to a woman who happens to be a PR person who lives in mid-Missouri, very close to the university. And she represents a lot of people who are really upset about this, because when I first looked at it, I thought, oh, good, it happened quickly. It's going to, well, it's not going to end. In fact, even before I read this, something just came out moments ago that Jonathan Butler, who had the protest about all this, has said this is only the beginning, so there's more to be coming. We'll see what that is. But she said, and I'm quoting now, "It's disappointing that 2 men lost their jobs over a few students upset by a few bad words said." She says it's intimidation for one person to go on a hunger strike to get 2 guys fired. And she said, I think there were other ways to handle this. She was very upset at the students and thinks the students are wrong. There are an awful lot of adults, especially, by the way, that think the students are wrong. So as you set this up, there are clearly 2 sides to this issue in terms of how the university handled it, but maybe they didn't handle it right by letting him resign that quickly. Who knows? But I'll leave it to you from there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what was troubling to me, at least, you know, is that I couldn't, and Joe Scarborough, Morning Joe, pointed this out too, and I don't always agree with Joe. He's a pretty reasonable guy, and he had the same reaction as I did, which is I'm reading the news accounts, as I always do to prepare for these shows, and there were these incidents that were referred to. I mean, when you look at the demands, for instance, of this group, the very first thing they said is that the president has to admit that he's part of this white privilege, and right away that just turned me off. When you go down that road without a legitimate grievance, and maybe they had legitimate grievances, of course, maybe a hate crime or an incident wasn't properly investigated or dealt with, or maybe he didn't use his power of the podium to speak out against it quickly enough. But it didn't sound like, on the face of it, guys, that this guy was a really bad guy. And look, he didn't make any racist statements. He didn't make discriminatory statements. I think the sense of it was he just wasn't showing the leadership necessary. So that troubles me that he was chased out because of that. My understanding also is that he did have a plan in place that, and as we all know in higher education, things take a long time to get done because of various bureaucracies. So he had some kind of diversity plan in place to address some of the earlier grievances. I understand that. But I think what really pushed this over the edge from my read of it, and again, just reading the media, was this many, I think like 9 or 10 deans of different departments wrote in and said, we want him to leave. So I think that had probably played a role as much or even more so than the protest. So that's where I like to go with, just at least talk, maybe hear what you guys have to say about that part of it. Greg?
Well, universities are highly complex political high-dollar machines, and students, quite frankly, undergrad students in particular, are they're the lint and the metal dust and the gunk that you hope is not going to gum up your machine, which is otherwise running smoothly. And that's a rather cynical attitude, but I believe that an anonymous poll of university administrators would reveal that it's a fairly widely held attitude. What we are seeing in its entirety was predictable and should have been prepared for. This is less about the failure of one man at the head of the university system or one chancellor on a campus not doing X, and more a matter of the systems and the board's failure to look at the shifts in societal attitudes and personal behaviors of people that age and say, okay, how do we shift how we're interacting with our student body on a broad basis to A, make them feel like they are included, but B, also make sure that the crazy doesn't bubble over. And that sounds very dismissive of the students' concerns. Trust me when I say to you, if this were an angry group of young Republicans, I would still be calling them crazies based
I know you would. Yeah.
on what's going on here. Yeah, believe me, this event is going to be used to sell crisis prep services throughout higher ed for the next 5 years.
Well, I'm sorry. I just wanted to agree with you in that sense, Greg. First of all, this was eminently preventable, but there were some specific problems. Not only did he make a lot of moves people didn't like, he also cut the health care of graduate assistants right before the beginning of the year, and there was like no discussion. It's just here's a note, and it sounds like Emily talked about that too with the fraternities and sororities. They weren't included; they were just told. So I think you mentioned at the beginning, Rich, there was a lack of leadership, but to kind of dismiss that. I think leadership on a college campus is very important. I got to work on Montana State University and their leadership there, and they recognize the fact they've got to be out and about with the students, with the faculty, and communicating. And it was a failure of leadership. They were slow to react, like after the swastika that was painted in the dorm with feces, human feces, which is reported constantly and disgusting in itself, and I feel bad talking about it. But it took him a week to say something, and there probably should have been the next. And that feeds into the psychology. And keep in mind, what we're talking about here is kind of a perception more than reality. This guy may have been a great administrator. We don't know that because the perception is he wasn't. And that's why this was preventable, because the leaders seemed to show a blind eye to what was going on. There was a lack of real concern that people felt too. There were words. And in fact, you talked about this slow university machine. The report wasn't due till April of 2016. That's still, what, 5 months away? Yeah. So that's moving. Think about students. Think about yourself and your kid.
I agree with you. That was the reason
they got to adapt to us as student and even faculty. It can't be their own pace.
Right. No, that's a great point. I think what one of the things that troubled me about this, if you had, and again, all of us are picking up the story in the last 48 hours or so, or 24 hours, and catching up. But obviously, from what Emily said and what we're reading, this is one of those crises we talk about in our business, which is, there are two kinds of crises. There's the immediate, quick thing that happens because of a natural disaster or a crime or something like that, or a natural, a health scare, or you have something that's like this, which is what I call a slow brewing crisis over a period of time that comes to a head. I think what troubles me, and I've read some of this in some of the media as well, is that it took the power of the football team to send this guy out. And I would have, if he was going to have to be forced out, I would have preferred it happen in a different way. In other words, the football players, if they were boycotting a game this Saturday, from what I read, and if they boycotted that game, the school would have lost $1 million, folks. And again, for me, it's a larger issue. As a former sports writer, this resonates with me. The power of college sports over the administration. I think for me that part of it is troubling. Everything else aside, that it's troubling to me that was what forced him out ultimately. And that's how it's being reported too in a lot of circles. I think that it was the football team that did this, when in fact, as we've all read, and as you aptly pointed out, Tripp and Greg, that there's other situations that led to this. So
think what they'd accomplish if they had a winning team.
Yeah, that would actually, Greg has a good point, because first of all, but I want to address two quick things. One is this could be the tip of the iceberg. Other schools may recognize it. You mentioned it spread. Yale had a huge march yesterday about racial division. That's number one. But the question about the football team is a good one, because there are a lot of people who speculate, and I'm one of them, that if we were headed for the SEC title with the Tigers, Mizzou Tigers, this would not have happened, because their own interest of trying to get to the SEC big game would have outweighed this. But they're 4-4, 4-5, I forget which. And they're a terrible team now. They have not much hope for the rest of the season. So this might have been the players saying, well, we might as well do this, because it doesn't matter if we play or not. So that's another factor to consider. But the power of the athletes is something. And in fact, you talk about privilege. I didn't.
That's the privilege.
The woman told me that I was telling you about before, this PR woman said, look, who is privileged here? My daughter can't go out and protest because she has to go to her classes. She's got a scholarship. She's got 2 jobs. These are the privileged people they're talking about. She couldn't even do it if she wanted to. And her daughter, by the way, the senior, also really disagreed with how the administration handled this. They said they should have said to the football players, and keep in mind, they were supporting one guy with a hunger strike. Okay, that's what this was really about. And the football team later said it wasn't about removing the chancellor or the president. It was about saving the life of this one guy who said, I will not eat or take nourishment anymore until they're gone. Now, that's playing with words, but this whole thing becomes convoluted.
Yeah, Greg, go ahead. I think you want to say something.
Sorry, Greg.
No. Your points are well made. I admit, and I really can't separate my crisis manager hat from my personal beliefs hat on this. I would like to have seen the system president last another day or so. The board of, do they not call themselves the board of curators?
I was, and I have to plead ignorance.
They've not
I thought there was some art group when I read it. I saw curators. I plead ignorance on that. I never heard the term, but go ahead.
This is Missouri. This is Missouri.
Okay, you guys know best. I'm just, hick in the Northeast. What do I know? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Greg.
By the time you admitted it.
Anyway, my point was just that, one suspects that it was not necessarily the president's decision to leave that quickly under those circumstances, and the logical leap from that was that he was pushed out. I question who was advising the board. From a legal standpoint, he certainly didn't need to go that quickly, if at all. And there was a chance to seize some procedural and moral high ground there that was abandoned.
Though, one of the things that makes me think he should have gone is his resignation statement. And I don't know if you had a chance to read it, which was very different from his statement on Sunday. Keep in mind there are two statements.
Right.
Sunday statement saying we're going to work on this and we're going to listen, and kind of implying I'm not leaving. And when I read that Sunday statement, I said he'll be gone. I said he'll be gone tomorrow. I really, actually, no kidding, predicted he would be gone. And his Monday resignation letter, is kind of convoluted and mixed. For example, he talks about how important it is to listen, and that's how you solve things. And then said, "But I didn't listen." So it's a very weird letter. I mean, in fact, if I may read just a couple, to my friends and my supporters that have been so gracious. Well, shouldn't that have been who have been so gracious, by the way, grammatically? But anyway, that have been so gracious.
Public school, don't get picky.
You're right. At the English department. And I've sent so many texts and calls of support. I understand that you may be frustrated as well. So the question is, why did we get to this very difficult situation? It is my belief that we stopped listening to each other. We didn't respond or react. We got frustrated with each other, and we forced individuals like Jonathan Butler to take immediate action and unusual steps to effect change. This is not, I repeat, not the way change should come about. Change comes across from listening, learning, caring, and conversation, and it goes on. But the point is, if he knows this stuff, why didn't he do it before? Why did he acknowledge he stopped listening and then say, okay, now I'll listen? I can see the frustration with this guy just in the way the letter is written.
Yeah. Good. It's a valid point. Certainly, sometimes, and we know this, all of us know this from our crisis management work, which is when you're dealing with a client, until they have basically a gun to their head and they have to be forced out, it's the first time maybe that they acknowledge there's a problem at all. And I think that may have been it. He may have felt his job was safe, that he could deal with this, that he could weather the storm, as many people do in these situations, until you tell them, hey, you've got a really big problem and you're just not, you're not taking it seriously enough. And I've had conversations, and I'm sure you guys, please share, I've had so many conversations like that with prospects and clients when they get on the phone with me, and they're just not at that point yet where they realize they did something wrong. Whether I or a colleague could help them or not is irrelevant. It's just the acknowledgement. Because,
well, and as not to get too inside baseball, but maybe you guys confirm.
And then I have a question for Greg. I got to ask, by the way.
My life experience is you have a much higher chance of success when you're hired by the board than when you're hired by the CEO. Right. And this is a case where one wishes the board, had some better counsel.
But I have a question for you, Greg, in all of this, because there's one other thing, and I'd be interested in this. The letter of resignation says this. He quotes the scripture, Psalm 46:1. God is our refuge and strength and our ever-present in trouble. We need to use my resignation. Please use this resignation to heal, not to hate, and goes on. But should you quote the Bible in a resignation letter from a school? I'm just curious, and I don't know the answer. I'm asking that's an interesting way to do it.
I think that guy had a lot more on his mind about rather than whether or not it's appropriate to quote the Bible at that time. That may be the most genuine part of his note. You know, I didn't have an issue with it. I'm biased because I'm a person of faith. I think that there's a big difference between quoting the Bible in a commencement address when you're not under a lot of pressure and all eyes are upon you and the pot hasn't yet boiled but could boil over some small thing, and this. Have you heard anybody call him out on that?
Yeah. I read a couple comments that suggested that that was inappropriate. And by the way, I thought so at first too, and it has nothing. I'm thinking of the whole audience. You're right. For those of faith, though, it's great. But for those,
and you're right.
You know, I didn't have a problem with it, and I'm not. You know, I mean, and the reason I didn't have a problem with that, and I agree with Greg on that part of it, that it's not that important to him. I mean, this was his you know, his departure message. It was personal. I agree if it came up in a commencement address or a keynote as president, people could rightfully criticize it. But again, here, it's the way he used it. Again, that was the least of his problems, and not a big deal on my end. I think, you know. Oh, by the way, I just want to point out, and there was a really good article in the Chronicle of Higher Education today, and I tried to get this guy at the last minute. It was really late in the day. And I'm Drax Stribling. He wrote a piece today, and the headline is. In fact, I'll pull it up real quickly because there's some pieces here that are interesting. I want to share with the group.
Rich, does this mean I was your second or third choice? Now I'm hurt.
No, you invited this. You invited overnight at 1 o'clock yesterday morning. Remember this morning? Remember, both of you. And it's only because you liked something on my Facebook page I was reminded I got to get Greg on this show. Anyway, but by the way, for our viewers' benefit, who if you haven't joined us before, these guys know. I decide on the topic very often at the very last minute because we try to be timely on the show with breaking news. So I don't decide till the day of a day before. So there's my cover. Anyway, so this piece here, guys, I encourage everyone to read it who's interested because this is look, folks, this is like we always talk about on the show, this is a good case study for higher education across the board. And, you know, this story talks about this guy being slow to respond. Listen, I graduated college in 1983, and I remember even then, when there were two college presidents that I was a student under, there were the same issues back then with college president. This is not a new thing. I think we're just in a different culture today, a different atmosphere than we might have been 30 years ago. But there were student protests about things just like this, about being tone deaf. Really, to really get to the chase, it's being tone deaf to student concerns, student grievances, ranging from raising the tuition, cutting departments, and I can tell you that in the last couple of years I've advised the college president and administration because he was catching a lot of heat because he eliminated a department that a lot of people thought should not have been eliminated, and you could lose your job over things like that today as well. So I just want to point out this article here, the Chronicle of Higher Education, because there really is a lot about the trends. And what he says in this, there's a nice little sidebar here, gentlemen. The 5 moments that led to the resignation. So number 1, graduate students learn in August that health insurance won't be subsidized. So that was number 1. Number 2, a student leader's account of a racist incident goes viral. This is back in September. When the president of the Missouri Students Association, Peyton Head, wrote on Facebook that he'd been accosted on campus by men who yelled a racial epithet at him out of a truck. I'm sorry. Number 3, a homecoming parade, and that's the one I think Emily was referring to. A homecoming parade gets tense. Students protesting the racist incidents, united under the name Concerned Student 1950, surrounded Mr. Wolf's car at a homecoming parade in October. And when the students refused to move, they were dispersed by police officers. So maybe a little heavy-handed there. And throughout the incident, Mr. Wolf stayed in the car, which then allegedly bumped at least to one of the protesters as it drove away. Number 4, Jonathan Butler begins a hunger strike. Number 5, football players threaten a boycott, and the coach backs them up. So this was a nice sidebar to help me follow this. What led up to this? It shows that that brewing crisis we all talk about. So any thoughts on that, gentlemen, about how this builds up and what this might mean for other campuses, and if you're advising other campuses about how to prepare for things like this?
Well, if I may just quickly, and then I'll turn it over to the larger-brained Tripp. I take issue with the headline. Scroll down for a second so your folks can see it.
Yeah.
This is not a national debate on race. We have had an ongoing, if you want to call it a debate on race, on college campuses since the first college campus was founded in this country. This is nothing new.
Fair point. But yeah, good.
And I worry about seeing headlines like this in the Chronicle of Higher Education because I think that is a dangerous distraction for college administrators. The debate is the shift in power to students who are both activated by changes in their societal norms and changes in their beliefs, as well as enabling technology that allows them to very quickly organize events like this. And that is the thing that college administrators should be planning for and thinking strategically about how to deal with, not throwing more, I will now say a controversial thing, not throwing more money at quote-unquote trying to understand race issues. That is an infinite black hole of where money and time can go. What we need to do is figure out how to respond to those who disagree with us in a manner that lets progress move forward peacefully.
Let me just read from this article. Your point well taken about the headline, but it is a good article. He did interview a lot of people, and let me just read you some pieces that were of interest that goes to what you're saying, Greg, or may not. But there's a paragraph here that reads as follows: the events at Missouri are evidence that the heightened national dialogue about race will increasingly pull in higher education, said Chad Williams, an associate professor of African and African American Studies at Brandeis University. Quote, college campuses see themselves as existing within a bubble, worlds unto themselves, said Mr. Williams, who has incorporated recently racially charged events into his teaching. But you cannot divorce the issues that take place on college and university campuses from the broader context. On that point, I agree with him. I think that's a valid point he makes. Without taking sides in this, let me just bring myself back here. I think he makes a valid point here in terms of universities very often they're not connected. We talk about town and gown relationships, and I've had these conversations with some clients about this. It's being part of a larger community, whether that community is the town in which your campus resides in or the broader context of around the country. So I think that's a valid point he makes, and I wonder what you guys think about that point.
Rich, a couple things. First of all, I think the bubble, I agree with that, but the bubble burst from within in this case. But I want to go back to a couple things Greg said, and it relates to that too, as well as what you just said. First of all, social media, this would not have happened 30 years ago because of social media. There would have been something, but social media has made all the difference. If you look at Facebook and all the stuff on Twitter. I was, however, part of protest in, you graduated in '83, I'm a lot older than you. I graduated Northwestern in '72, and we were, of the Big Ten schools, the mildest, but there were protests. We shut down the school for several days. We took over the road, the main road from campus.
And for our younger viewers, I imagine that was because of the Vietnam War.
It was the Vietnam War. I was going to get to that. But here's more important is this, and this relates to your bubble comment. The leaders of the university weren't watching Ferguson. This all began, rightly or wrongly, with the Ferguson situation, and more and more organizations have been recognizing things are changing. There's a new dialogue, a new discussion, and it can cause trouble for organizations if they don't react or at least do something. And I think that the biggest thing, Ferguson is only 120 miles from the University of Missouri, and they have many students from Ferguson. I think that was maybe one of their biggest mistakes. The lesson of Ferguson was not learned by this educational institution.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, and I think this goes to just some advice for anyone watching the higher ed management area. You know, as a college, very often I've seen this, you have a college president who may come from strictly an academic world or strictly from a business world, and they have these jobs, and it goes to what this other gentleman from Brandeis said, is that they live on this campus in that world, you know, and maybe not realizing from the day they take that job that you're really like the mayor of a little city. I think in this case, you have 35,000 students. you can't just worry about the academics. You have to worry about quality of life and culture on that campus. And, you know, some campuses just do that better than others. Some campuses, I believe, are steeped in traditions that are better or worse on these issues as well. And I think, you know, it really goes to these leaders getting the proper training to understand from the day they take that job that it's much bigger than just the academics. And a lot of them do get that. But some of them get bad advice as well from boards and other people, you know, so.
Well, you're right about that. And, you know, I know we don't have much time left, but I'd like to bring up one more issue that I think is important to talk about, and that's the actual protest that happened and how the media, on Sunday I believe it was, and how the media was handled by that. Because I know this is, as an ex-media person,
all of us, yeah.
We're all ex-media people, but in addition, just as a PR and crisis counselor, if you say, the media if you're the protesters, if you will, the media is an opportunity for you, and it looks to me like they didn't understand that, and the fact that they didn't want the press to shoot pictures, to take simple pictures in a common area. By the way, it's a public area. We're not talking private property. Really concerns me, and I think one of the stories that's come out of this, which by the way detracted from the protesters, was the fact that they wouldn't let the media in. So that 2 or 3 minutes they're spending, all the networks were spending, and a lot of it on Facebook, people are watching that stuff. That's 2 or 3 minutes that the protesters don't get their racism or whatever other message they may want to get out. And I think that I don't know where the failing is, that these students don't understand the importance of media, because we can complain about it all we want, but if it weren't for the media, it would, you know, we can go through the list from Watergate on down of the things that might not have been uncovered, and we could be in a lot worse shape. But I'd rather let Greg do that, because this is even closer to his heart than mine.
Well, I will say this: it's a sign of the genuineness of the protest effort that they took that approach, because if there were professional protest organizers in there, they would have known better.
And they would have had Al Sharpton there or someone like that.
Well, having said that,
which would not have been a good idea, by the way, because I'm not a fan of his at all. But that guy knew how to get attention at protests. We'll say that.
I was well and truly lit up about the video that now millions of people have seen of these protesters pushing back against this student photographer. If I'm going to try and be rational, it is not the job of the covered to make coverage easy. I am disappointed that students don't understand the First Amendment better. I'm disappointed that as a PR professional that they didn't seize the opportunity.
Yeah, but by the way, the University of Missouri Journalism Department, which is one of the most prestigious in the world, as we all know, the dean came out with a statement basically saying, you know, they should have known better about First Amendment. So that
right.
was,
and the dean's statement, by the way, is a fantastic example. If we had more time, we'd parse it word by word. Fantastic example of a cover statement that's authoritative, strikes the right tone. Really amazing. I will continue to draw a distinction between students who didn't know any better and employees of the university who, as employees of a government university, are representatives of the government, saying things like, can I get some muscle over here to get rid of this reporter? Those people, you know, I don't care how much tenure you have. There needs to be a quick drill down to that person's dismissal.
I think, I'm not sure if he was disciplined or dismissed yet. I have to go back and catch up with that. But she was not a full faculty staff member. My understanding, and Tripp, you may have this at your fingertips. My understanding, she was like an assistant professor. So
that's fine. She can be assistant.
But your point, I totally agree with your point, Greg. She should not have even been there. She should not have even been there. I mean, well, it was inappropriate.
She was a communications professor,
which makes it worse.
His privileges in the journalism department, and those were revoked today. Okay. Is what it was. Because this woman, obviously, if she's in the journalism department, had no clue what journalism and First Amendment's about.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, very interesting. You know, any other words of wisdom, folks? Before, you know, I want to. If you guys can you guys stay with me for another 5 or 10 minutes? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because I want to do a little bit on the debate coming up tonight. Because I got two great.
Can you hear me? All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right now. I'm losing my internet connection. Apparently, I've just gotten an alert, so I'll try to stay with you. I may end up dropping off.
Okay.
Company's been really inconsistent with internet over the last few days.
You're still good. So for the moment, we got you. Just so, any closing thoughts? Any closing tips you guys might, if you were advising a college president? Let's say you have a college president who's looking at this story and looking for some advice about, hey, what can I do to learn from this and to prepare for something like this? Any quick thoughts on that, gentlemen?
Yeah. Here's the thing. Have a crisis plan. There. I have now earned my $100,000 fee. Okay?
Oh, that's a good fee. Yeah.
Have a crisis plan. And for a university not to have a plan that covers national media attention focused on a student protest is, if it's a public university, I'd go so far as to say it's taxpayer malpractice, because it's going to happen eventually.
Great point. Great point. And I would just add to that, because that's a great point about having a plan, is make sure you take into account a wide variety of scenarios, the protest being one of them, bad behavior by student athletes, and we've seen that as well. I think Greg and Tripp, you may have joined me on one of those shows a few years ago. We had a show about Rutgers, and we did a show on Penn State. So these are all stories that, even though they may appear to be limited to the athletics department or a local city where a college may reside, these are national stories, and they blow up very fast. Much because of the great point Tripp made earlier about social media. It takes one tweet, one hunger strike, one Facebook post to send everybody into a tizzy. And I think the other thing you have to keep in mind, folks, is that you can't always overreact to a Facebook post or a tweet or a YouTube video. You have to make sure you analyze it carefully and take the appropriate reaction. Sometimes it does require a strong reaction, a quick reaction, but other times it doesn't, and that's why you need people to advise you on that.
Don't you tell me not to overreact. I'll start yelling Attica, Attica, and burn this place down.
Well, you're not exactly Al Pacino, but so,
just hurt me, Rich.
Tripp, I know you rejoined the call. Just any one or two tips you'd give to higher education management, college presidents, boards, about what they, what lessons can they learn from this?
Yeah. Well, I missed Greg's, and I may end up repeating it because, again, okay. I want to say Further Communications Internet is really bad. I also wrote a review about how bad their app is, and that's been published too. But that's a whole other matter.
Well, Greg have a crisis communications plan, basically.
Yeah, but their plan is basically, it doesn't exist, you're wrong, and then well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, here's the real. Let's get back to what's important here. And what's important is, number one, most of these crises are preventable. This, I still say, was a preventable crisis had they been taking action, and they weren't taking action. And taking action doesn't mean necessarily changing the way that the protesters want, but it does mean at least talking and doing something, and speed is important too. April 2016 was too late. But besides that, you should have a plan. Actually, not a plan. I call them guidelines, because the reason I say you shouldn't have a plan is that no plan is going to be exact to the situation. There should be guidelines that you look at to follow, but be ready for this kind of thing. Although, even if you're ready for it, this resignation idea, who knows what really went on behind the scenes? Was he forced out? Did he have a religious moment where he decided this isn't right for me and I can't do that? And I don't mean that in a sarcastic way. I mean it in a true emotional way. But having a plan, and who are your spokespeople? Not only who are your spokespeople, because when you think about it, I don't even know who spoke for the university. We just got these from the university statements and some of the stuff that I read. But who are going to be your spokespeople, and who are your alternatives? I mean, a lot of times, I've seen corporations have this. The only spokesperson is the CEO. But what if the CEO is the one who is the bad guy? What if the CEO is about to be fired? Obviously, he or she can't be the spokesperson. So you have to have good guidelines that have backup situations, and then you also have to have spontaneity. Finally, the communication people have to be at the table. Leaders should know that. And too many times they're not. The lawyers are at the table, and the communications people aren't. And I'm not saying to the leaders, listen to everything we say, we're always right. But I am saying you've got to balance what the legal people say what the communications people say to help understand the best thing to communicate with all audiences. Because, as I mentioned in this case, when they acted quickly, my crisis hat said, "Oh, good, it's going to act quickly. It's going to be over." I was wrong. It's not going to be over, and one of the reasons is so many people are actually upset at the decision. This is one of the, just like Republicans and Democrats, looks like we're kind of split down the middle on this one. So even if you do everything right, it's kind of like our last show. We talked about the same thing. Even if you do everything right, it's not always going to work out for you in this day and age because of social media, which allows whole new sets of opinions to come out and allows a lot more dialogue.
A lot of half-truths and lies and rumors.
And influence, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just add to that a couple of things. I think, and you guys, it actually follows very nicely with both of your points, and I'll just add to that, which is you have a crisis communications plan, you decide who the spokespeople are, but you also have to rehearse for certain scenarios. So the one scenario where most college campuses, I believe, understand now, unfortunately because of the world we live in, is like an active shooter situation, because we've seen so many of those. That's something they pay attention to. They're pretty well trained for that. But that's just one example. There are so many others you have to rehearse for as well. Changes in leadership. How are we going to communicate that? Now, one of the issues I have, and I've seen this over and over again, is, and this is not just a conversation about college presidents, it's about change in leadership at the CEO level. So when you have a death or an injury or someone becomes incapacitated, who's next in line, and how do you deal with that? In this case, and I've seen this before, there's an interim president. And I think the sooner that this university gets a permanent president, the better off they'll be. So students and faculty and dean will be able to, get behind that person and support them so that they can start dealing with some of these issues, which everybody knows they have to deal with. But these interim presidents and chancellors, I've seen one former client where the interim president lasted for like 2 years, and then they gave him the job anyway. Like, what took you so long? If this guy. So that's something that will help right away, I believe, and that's just something really important to do. When you have a loss of a leader, however it happens, make sure you have a plan and someone in place as quickly as possible, and get that media trained. That's for damn sure. So anyway,
yeah, the irony of all of this is it's a local campus problem and a local community's reaction to the campus problem. By escalating and elevating it to a system-wide problem with the resignation of the president and a nationwide problem in terms of the media, they've actually lessened the opportunity for an appropriate replacement who will listen better and provide locally relevant solutions, because now it becomes a political appointment by the governor of a new president who, I have absolute confidence that Jay Nixon can call in enough favors on the board of curators to get any interim president he wants in there. Right. And it will be a solution that satisfies constituencies. I'm not sure that chief among that list will be the local campus constituency of the aggrieved.
Right. Good point. And I just want to quickly add also that, this is a situation, we talked about it, we touched on it earlier, just because you have these resignations doesn't mean everything's nice and cozy again. This reputation building and goodwill building has to go on. We know from Sandusky and Penn State, we know from Rutgers scandals that these things take time to rebuild reputation. So, and I know from looking at the University of Missouri's website, they have a lot of communications people. Their job right now, job one, is to work on the communications, being very even more transparent than ever, and making sure that the lines of communication stay open over the long term, and then telling the good stories of the university. Because let's face it, my poor cousin, she's about to graduate, and she has to graduate in this climate, which is unfortunate for her and the other students in her class. Nobody wants to go out like that, and we all remember what happened at Penn State. How many alumni and students were upset at what happened to their precious institution with that scandal. So it's really important to rebuild reputation with all the critical audiences as quickly as possible and take all the right measures to do that. So I'll leave it at that. Unless is there anything else you guys want to add on this before we move to the debate?
Yeah, there is, if I may, although I have to get that away. Okay, two things. First is
2-minute warning.
Melissa Click, who is the professor we're talking about, the media professor, has apologized for the language and she used Monday. That's number one. Number two, there is one more factor we haven't discussed, and that is that Tim Wolf, according to at least a couple articles I read, and I looked way back on this, was brought into the university as the slash and burn guy. That they brought him in 2011 when the recession was still impacting badly the university, and they brought in a bad guy knowing he was going to be temporary. And it may be that he was a slash and burn. He was not a leader. You talked about leadership before. He didn't understand universities. In fact, he didn't. He came out of a business world. Only has, I don't even think he has a master's degree. I think all he has is a bachelor's degree, which a lot of, I've read even recently, a lot of the faculty was upset that a bachelor's degree guy is running all of the system. That maybe this isn't such a surprise after all, that he didn't know how to communicate, and he was slashing and burning, and it finally caught up with him. He was supposed to be temporary anyway. He might figure, I did a lot in 4 years. Sayonara University. I'm sure I bet he got a big package to leave.
But it's not because he didn't have a master's degree. Let's just be clear on that.
No.
That's academic snobbery in my view. That's academic snobbery.
A lot of people have doctorates in life when they only have a high school education. I mean, I would say that Bill Gates probably has a doctorate, and Stephen Jobs did. But in any case, the point is that is another factor to consider, that this may not be such a surprise after all. Maybe how it happens is a surprise, and how quickly.
Exactly. And that's to close the loop on this. That's what, again, it took and we can have another show sometime about the influence of college athletes on administration. I think it'll be interesting, and I have some really good colleagues, former sports writers and people who are in communications at colleges who have been on the show. I'd like to do a show on that. So thank you both for that part of it. And in the next 5 or 10 minutes, if you guys will just hang in there for a few more minutes, I do want to talk about this debate tonight. That's 8 o'clock Eastern time. I'm not even sure what time it starts, but I have it.
9. I think it's 9 Eastern tonight.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
Because I wanted to watch.
So we all want to watch this. Greg, what are your I've been following these debates and reading about the candidates. Let me ask you, because I know you're an expert on this. Who has the most to lose tonight? Who has the most to gain from the GOP debate?
Well, let's be clear. If I was a genuine expert on this,
I
would have neutralized the Trump campaign on behalf of America already. So clearly my powers are limited.
But your analysis is excellent. So
Marco Rubio is in a precarious position. He's starting to get traction. He is generally regarded by the Hillary camp as the biggest threat should he be the breakout leader, and so.
And why is that, Greg? Why for our viewers' benefit? Why is
everything from optics to message? His message is very optimistic. He's young. Hillary is old. He projects certainly more of an affinity and a relationship with those who are not lily white than Hillary does. He is an optimistic Republican in a field of hell in a handbasket Republicans, which I believe has been one of the reasons he's edged out of the pack quite a bit. He faces challenges. The money problems and money questions are not going to go away, but he's been good at deflecting them. His biggest challenger from beneath is Ted Cruz, who has a superior ground game and a very specific state-by-state plan for capturing the old Reagan Democrat blue-collar coalition. But if Marco can have a couple of breakout moments tonight, I think you'll start to see points ebb away from Dr. Carson, who is, win, lose, or draw, he has not had a good week. And
he's raised $3.5 million, and he says, I hate the media, and that people love that, the base loves that, right? So I disagree. I mean, look, I don't think he had a good week from where I'm sitting because of my views, but on the facts seem to say otherwise. So talk to me about that. It's interesting you say.
Well, look, we have to get past this notion, I think, that what's happening now reflects what's going to happen next November.
I agree.
Right now, 4 years ago, Herman Cain was ahead of Mitt Romney. And this is a certain flavor of Republicans and conservatives equivalent of a summer romance. You don't want to think about September, but September's going to come. And so yes, Trump and Ben Carson are in the lead right now. I do not believe Ben Carson has the ground game or long-term the money to continue to erode away at Trump's voters and become the number one. Trump, I don't know. I have given up prognosticating on Trump. The man can spend as much as he wants. He can say whatever he wants. It's like running against Buddha. You know, he just sits there and does his thing, and people pull whatever meaning they want from it.
May I ask you a question of Greg? Rich, is that okay?
Yeah, please. You don't need my permission. This is an informal show.
Okay, I didn't want to interrupt, but I want to go back to Ben Carson, because to me, and I will say right out, I'm not a supporter of Ben Carson. I think he's loony sometimes. And one of the things that concerns me is that there have been, that he complains about the vetting of the media of his stories that he tells. Did he really stab a kid with a knife, and about the violence and the West Point thing? All of these stories are now coming out, which when you're about to be the leader or are the leader, that's going to happen. And people are like defending him, the media, they're blasting the media. At some point, Greg, do the mistruths that any candidate, in this case it happens to be Carson, tells, even that the supportive base finally realizes, I'm not sure if I trust this guy anymore. And I just don't know the answer to that.
I think the answer is they say the same thing about Hillary, and they go right back and say, "What about her lies?" And that's their cover, right, Greg?
I agree. I agree with that too. I don't trust Hillary either. I don't trust Carson. I mean, there's two. You can pick the politician.
There is a cynical quote from. I don't know if it made it into the movie, but it's in the book Our Brand is Crisis, or not the book, the original documentary goes something like, you're going to get all of the thinking candidates. Unfortunately, we need a majority. And there is a sizable vein of voter that quite literally will vote for Hillary no matter what she does. There are flavors of
or against, by the way, or against.
Right, exactly. No, and I'm getting to that. There are flavors of Republicans who will, cannot see past. No, our GOP-led Congress has failed us. The Supreme Court has failed us. Nothing matters more than getting an outsider. I don't know what happens to those people. I'm guessing a lot of them still show up on election day a year from now, and they pull the rod for some sort of more establishment-looking candidate. But I don't know. Look, maybe we're all on a suicide mission. Yeah, Trump, let's go.
Well, let me ask you. One of the questions that I've been dying to ask you, Greg, is Jeb. I mean, what is he? It seems to me he has the most to lose tonight, but maybe I'm wrong. Everybody thought he was the establishment.
He's polling at 3%. He's got about 5 guys in a bar in Florida to lose. That's all.
So he's got the most to gain tonight, in a way. If Bush has a good performance,
Mike, let me be more direct. Is Jeb going to be around in 2 weeks?
It depends on how he does tonight. He's starting.
That's what I'm trying to get.
Lose money to Rubio, and what he wants to do is not so much driven by what's in his heart. It's driven by what the donors want, right? And if a significant portion of his big donors say, yeah, okay, that was a mistake, I'm going to back Rubio now, or whoever, then, he doesn't get to keep running unless he wants to spend his own money.
Greg, can't Dad and his dad and his brother kind of have some influence over that big money, whether they like it or not? They can put the screws to him and say, hey, you've been helping us for years, you're going to help us again.
Yeah, although one wonders if they didn't already pump that particular well dry, giving Bush his $100+ million in startup money.
You may be right. I was just curious about that.
We're all evil and shadowy over on this side. There's no telling what we'll pull.
Well, it's certainly entertaining. I'll just want to point to an article I read today. I honestly can't remember where I read it, but it was a great piece for us. As much as I hate to admit it was because of Trump, it helps people in our business. And the basic premise of the story was and I laughed at it because it's something that the three of us have known for years, which is media relations, public affairs, public relations is very powerful in helping a candidate. And this article, it may have been the New York Times, forgive me, I'll add it to the site if I find it, but it basically was surmising that all of a sudden, you know, Trump is doing so well, and it's accurate in the sense that Trump has succeeded because he hasn't had to pay anything or almost next to nothing for political ads, which were always, Greg, the backbone of success or failure in a campaign, particularly at the local level. And here we are talking about, well, oh my God, look at the power of public relations, and Trump really, he did Saturday Night Live, and then he got in all the news, he called into all the programs. Well, that's stuff we would tell our clients anyway, right, if they were candidates, to use media relations before spending $1 billion on advertising, right? So I wanted to wrap the show up, what you guys' thoughts are on that. And Greg, you may have a different opinion, I don't know, but let's talk about advertising versus PR and the powers and weaknesses of each in the political
problem. Because political organizations on both sides of the aisle attract sycophants and the power hungry.
What's a sycophant? That's too many syllables. What's a sycophant?
Somebody, a yes man.
Thank you.
Or yes woman, let's be politically correct.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Anyway, but because I assume you've all done, as I have, truly strategic PR work where you're trying to say, okay, what's the messaging that's going to carry us for the next 5 years? You just couldn't deal with how disorganized and everyone has a voice at the table, and the loudest voice wins. Most political PR is. That's why it looks so bad most of the time, and it's run, you know, frankly, by young amateurs most of the time. Now, there are very good senior level campaign people out there working in the business. I am saying that the earned media portion of the business often ends up being amateur hour. And, you know, Trump is, like him or hate him, he's done enough entertainment work that he knows how to talk in a soundbite, knows that the truth is not as valuable as having something good to say, and knows that most of the time even bad publicity is going to work out for you. That's just a wholly different risk profile than what the candidates' internal people are telling them across all the other races.
Tripp, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think that, well, my big thing, politicians, and they have to do with the youth, is that this applies again to both sides of the aisle. This is not at all about Republicans or Democrats, and that's their ability to answer questions. I don't think they're properly prepared. You know, I heard an interesting essay on radio, I think it was on NPR, about the idea that they were talking about Marco Rubio and his potential because he has mastered the art of not answering the questions but redirecting them the way he wants. He said, but to be specific, he doesn't answer the question he's asked, he answers the questions he wants. And I think that is why, if you look at polls, so many people distrust politicians. I mean, look at the elections, how a lot of people are just getting away from it because they just don't trust these politicians. And my advice to them is that, at least from the PR side, is that learn to be more direct in instead of redirecting, address the question, and then only if it's relevant do you redirect. If it's not relevant, don't even try. But so if they ask you, you know, what do you think of this? Say, well, I think we've got work to do on that, or I think blah, blah, blah. At least give me something that addresses the question. That's why the reporters have to keep coming back and re-asking. And what's happening, maybe not consciously if we support that particular candidate, but subconsciously with all of them, is that lack of trust. Like, how many times have you said on a Sunday morning, if you watch those Sunday morning talk shows or want to throw something at the TV, answer the question? It just drives you crazy.
Well, you know, the other side of that, Tripp, the other side of that, and this is, you know, a lot of, especially on the Republican side, I read a lot of news sources, and if you look at, like, for example, you know, Fox News Facebook page or Sean Hannity, you read any of those comments, and the animus they have for the media, forgetting, of course, they're on a media page, that's another story, you know, but the animus they have for the media just for asking the question, there just seems to be that, and this is working for Trump, and it's working for Carson. I'll disagree with you slightly.
Limited. It's only working with a limited audience. Keep in mind, you're hearing voices from that 30%.
But it's showing up in the polls, Tripp, is my point. It's showing up.
Right.
polls.
The limited audience is all they need to talk to right now.
Okay. So right now it's the base, and you're right. They may change. Look, I think that the truth serum will come out when this field gets narrowed, as it will in the next few weeks and few months, certainly. You know, I would, but I just want to disagree with you slightly on one point, Tripp, and about answering the question. You know, one of the things that the three of us probably do when we're doing media training is teaching our clients how to pivot. So, look.
Nope. I teach them to answer. It's been terribly successful.
If it can be answered.
Let me change the term. Yeah. Address. You don't answer every question because you can't. You may not know the answer. You may not be able to talk about it. Right. But you address it directly.
Don't ignore it.
Pivot if it's relevant. But the problem is politicians pivot when it's not relevant.
Right.
And wait a minute. I need my candidate to debate Tripp's candidate. That's what I need.
That's why I don't train politicians. I don't like to train, but I don't take the work. I stay in a corporate and nonprofit world mostly, but even at corporate level, if a CEO wants to have credibility, you've got to, and I demonstrate that, and I show a bunch of examples where they don't and do it. And if you ask the audience, then okay, who do you like there? Every time I've done that, every time they always pick. Of these generic things I've shown, they pick the ones who address the question. And I don't set it up to tell them that's why I'm picking it. But they always find the ones who appear to answer the questions as a lot more credible. So I got to tell you, I think a lot of people are teaching this wrong, and maybe you guys disagree.
No, I mean, I think we're on the same page. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that you want to acknowledge the question, but if it's a question that doesn't that takes you off your message, what I teach my clients is how to come back to your own message, to take more control of the interview. In other words, and I think with these candidates and what we've seen in these debates is, you know, what look.
It's got to be, Rich, let me tell you though, it's got to be relevant. When you ask a candidate, so what do you think of the economy improving? And they say, we've got to go to war in Iraq. No, that wasn't the question.
I'm with you on that. I'm not talking about changing the subject. I'm talking about...
That's what I'm talking about.
Because the question can be very provocative and unfair. I mean, I'm not defending the Republicans the way they've handled it, because they've wasted a lot of airtime saying, well, you asked this question, and I think it was a Ted Cruz and Christie who went off on the moderator. And look, I've posted a lot about not blaming the media or the moderator. It's up to you. If you want to be the leader of the free world, you have to know how to take that fire in, whether it's from Megan Kelly, whoever it is, whoever's asking the question, Anderson Cooper, whoever's asking on Fox Business tonight. You have to be able to take that question, decide whether it's going to help you as a candidate to answer it as they want, or are you going to pivot, as the word I use, to say that's a valid question. We need to do this, but we also need to do this, and we haven't talked about this, and this is what I want to talk about. I'm talking in generics here, but that's what I'm trying to get at, so that you're not stuck with just the question. And look, there have been some unfair questions, but there have been some very fair questions that these candidates just don't want to answer, and they look foolish by getting that media, in my view.
I've been quiet for several minutes.
Obama said the other day.
Let Greg come in.
I'm sorry. I was talking about.
No, that's all right. I've been quiet for several minutes because I wanted my cynicism to come to a full boil before I spoke.
It's all Tripp's fault.
Nothing happens until you are elected.
That's right.
My job in helping a candidate is to help them get elected. It's very situational. At times, yes, being direct is the right course of action. But many, many other times, including primaries where there is a very large percentage of voters who are going to just vote the ticket, and so the primary is the de facto general, you know what? The right approach is to pivot to either the common enemy or the weakness of the other guy. And it's not necessarily best practice communications for informing the public, but at that point in time, we're not trying to inform the public, we're trying to win.
Right. You're trying to show the audience that you're better than the next person next to you that you're debating. And it'll be interesting to see tonight, because Ben Carson, let's just take it back to what we might see tonight. Some of the political scientists and analysts are saying, well, all of a sudden Ben's waking up. I guess his eyes are open now. But Ben's fighting back. and whether he's been the quiet, reserved one, and Donald's been the loudmouth, which he wears like a badge of honor, of course. And now it'd be interesting to see now that Trump has attacked him. I mean, Trump has really attacked him yesterday about the stabbing story. It'll be interesting to see if that back and forth happens tonight, or they'll be more respectful and supportive of each other. I mean, right now it's a race between, at the moment it's Trump and Carson. So they're gonna. I mean, Greg, how would you advise if you were advising Carson? Let's say, would you? Because I've heard everybody say, "Don't go after Trump; he'll burn you. He'll come out and, as Trump says, I'll beat you 10-1 if you attack me." Would you ever advise someone to? Is there a winnable solution to going after Trump, or do you have to just let him have his mouth off and then talk about something else? What would be your advice?
Well, I think it depends on which candidate you are. I think Marco Rubio has a path to directly and indirectly going after Trump. I don't think Dr. Carson does, because he doesn't have the rhetorical style or delivery to do it effectively. It's always going to sound like the kid who just got sand kicked in his face going, "Hey, don't do that."
And then he's going to brag about how he stabbed somebody.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. And one of the things that impressed me about Rubio, in one of the debates, I can't remember if it was the last one, the one before that, but he seemed to have a command of foreign policy. I mean, I like candidates who talk about foreign policy, and it seemed to be very limited discussion. Maybe it's not important to at this point in the primaries, but I thought it was good that he seemed to have a command of that, and the others were just all over the place. That was my sense of it. So. Well,
and to your point, foreign policy is a lot more than just defense policy.
National security,
when Republicans talk about foreign policy, they very often just get into the national defense lane and stay there. And
right.
I would like to see all of the candidates address that more. I think that recent events in Syria have notched that up as an issue. And if the economic trends continue as they have been, a lot of the disaffected, the economy's still in the toilet messaging is going to drop in effectiveness with marginal Republican voters by the time we're at next November. Now, make no mistake, big swath of middle America hurt by the recession still hasn't come back. That message is still going to resonate with them. But I think at the margins, if you have lowering unemployment and maybe even a rate increase from the Fed because the economy's picked up, then it starts to be a little less resonant.
Good point. Tripp, closing thought before we wrap up. I know I kept you guys late, and I appreciate you staying on for this part of it.
Yeah, I want to quickly say that I agree with what President Obama joked about last week, I think it was, when he said if these guys can't handle the CNBC moderators, how are they going to handle the Russians and the Chinese? Which I actually quite agree with, because all they're doing is complaining about tough questions. And are there unfair questions? Yeah, but you can still often turn those to your advantage. In fact, sometimes the most damning questions you can turn around to be a very big positive for you. Like, isn't it true that you haven't done enough of this? Well, it is true, and there's a reason I haven't done that, and that's because, and then you go into whatever you're going to say. So tonight, what concerns me is the Fox News business moderators, because what I want to see is that they ask tough questions, not unfair, and I think they're not going to go to the extreme. The CNBC people, they weren't prepared. They did ask some odd stuff. But I certainly hope they remain tough on them, that they're not afraid of the candidates on the other side or being too we're on your side. Being on your side doesn't mean you still shouldn't ask tough questions in terms of how they're going to handle. I think it's supposed to center on the economy. But likewise, there could be a few other questions like Maria Bartiromo, I can't pronounce her last name, who said that she wasn't afraid to go to Ben Carson and ask about these lies because that's been a big thing. But at the same time, Maria also said, tonight will prove to the American people this is about how Fox News business is better than CNBC. And that made me sad, only that this isn't about Fox business. It's about the candidates. It's about what we get to watch.
Right.
I'm done.
Great point. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I know we kept you late, but this is always a great discussion on two big issues of the day, so I'm grateful. Yeah, I mean, I would like to have both of you guys back, obviously, as I always do, as this campaign continues and we see who's left standing. You know, a month from now, 2 months from now, we get into the primary season, the Iowas, the South Carolina, and so forth, and maybe bring in some other people as well. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. So enjoy the debate. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you for making yourself available on short notice. I'm very grateful. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. If you want to tweet about anything you heard tonight, please use hashtag The Crisis Show. Our website is thecrisisshow.com. This is our 111th episode. We've been here we're in our 4th year, and we're excited to continue to bring these broadcasts to you. We don't do it every week, so it depends on all of our business situations, particularly mine because I'm the host. But we try to do it at least twice a month and get on air and talk about the issues, about crisis management, crisis communications, emergency management, and social media as well. So thank you for watching. Gentlemen, have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you soon. Good night, everyone.
Take care. Good. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure as usual. Good night. Bye-bye.